talk about the significance of what the Swedish government has now said.
Well, it's the Swedish prosecutor, really, as you pointed out, being forced to do so because Julian's lawyers have gone to the Swedish courts and said, how can this go for 4 years with allegations, over 4 years? Julian's in custody because he can't leave that embassy without being forced to go to Sweden and ultimately to the United States. And so it's a victory for Julian, but it also shows the outrage of the Swedish prosecutor and their system. Here it's 4 years. Julian has had to give up his passport, take refuge in the embassy, been given asylum, deprived of any kind of real freedom, no ability to visit his family, etc. 4 years later, now the prosecutor says, I can question Julian about these allegations.
So I want to go exactly to what she said. On Friday, the Director of Public Prosecutions in Sweden, Marianne Nye, issued a statement. She wrote, quote, "My view has always been that to perform an interview with him at the Ecuadorian embassy in London would lower the quality of the interview and that he would need to be present in Sweden in any case should there be a trial in the future. Now that time is of the essence. I have viewed it, therefore, necessary to accept such deficiencies in the investigation and likewise take the risk that the interview does not move the case forward."
Yeah, well, she's not telling the truth there. The Swedish Supreme Court just issued an order to the prosecutor saying, explain the investigatory delay in this case. The lower court said to her, this case is not proceeded according to Swedish law. It's not right. She could have done this questioning a long time ago. Of course, one of the big problems with this is that, meanwhile, the U.S. has continued its intensive investigation of Julian Assange. Just a few weeks ago, they admitted that they were going forward with an espionage investigation.
Well, how do you know that?
Well, there was a court decision based in a Freedom of Information Act case in which documents were requested about WikiLeaks supporters and what the Department of Justice was doing with them and what the FBI was doing with them. And the court decision said, we can't turn over these documents because there's an ongoing multi-subject investigation of Julian Assange, and it's for espionage, conspiracy, theft of government documents. We know it from that, and we know it from search warrants that have been issued to 3 WikiLeaks employees that indicate that there's an ongoing investigation.
How can Julian Assange, who is not a U.S. citizen, be charged with espionage here?
Well, I always found that, when I first got involved in this case, I always found that to be remarkable. He doesn't owe any loyalty to the United States as a citizen.
Is espionage different from the espionage law, the act?
Espionage is similar. Now, I think that one of the reasons you see that they're looking at him for theft of documents as well as for Computer Fraud and Abuse Act is because the U.S. understands that most countries in the world will not extradite Julian Assange for espionage. So they throw in these other, quote, non-espionage charges, even though they're all related to espionage. That's why they do it. Espionage is the classic political crime.
Explain what the Swedish prosecutor will be questioning Julian Assange about. Now, again, although some of the media will say he's been charged with sexual misconduct, he's never been charged. He hasn't even been questioned until apparently now he will be.
Right. Now, well, he did answer questions at one point in Sweden when he was there. And after that questioning, the charges were actually dismissed or not allowed to go forward. And then the case switched to another prosecutor, and that prosecutor then took it forward. So Sweden has this claimed, authority that it has this wonderful, fair country, but in fact it's not. And there was actually a recent periodic review of Sweden's compliance with its fundamental law and its laws of justice, and many countries have come in and said, what is going on in Sweden? How can it be 4 years for this? Well, as you said, it's allegations. He'll be questioned about those allegations. I'm assuming that the prosecutor will go forward and do this. Of course, there are some conditions. She has to apply under the Mutual Legal Assistance Treaty, which I assume Ecuador and the UK will allow it. She also has to turn over her investigative file to Julian Assange's lawyers and the defense team.
To you.
The defense team in Sweden, yes. And that is one of the things that has been litigated in the courts. How come they have failed to turn over parts of the file to Julian Assange's lawyers? And that ultimately this case and what's going to happen to it is going to go to the European Court of Human Rights on a number of issues, including his arbitrary detention in the embassy. But in the end, Sweden is there. But in the final answer is it's what's happened in the United States and the fact that this ongoing multi-subject investigation of Julian Assange, WikiLeaks, publishers, let's repeat that, publishers of documents taken by others.
What does espionage charges in the United States have to do with sexual misconduct allegations in Sweden?
Well, the main thing is that Julian would have gone to Sweden a long time ago had he gotten a guarantee from Sweden that they will not forward him to the United States for standing trial on the espionage charges. Sweden has never been willing to give that guarantee, and Sweden has a very bad reputation of complying with U.S. demands, whether it was sending some people from Sweden to Egypt for torture, or whether it's guaranteeing people who are asylees in Sweden that they won't be deported. So Sweden has not, a key here is that Sweden has not given the guarantee that it's required to do, and to recognize Julian's asylum. Let's understand, he's been given asylum by Ecuador. Every country in the world is obligated to recognize that asylum. And that's asylum because Ecuador said Julian Assange will be persecuted in the United States.
We only have a minute. What can happen now? Well, first of all, do you think part of the change has to do with the Swedish government changing? I don't know that. I know that there's been heavy litigation in Sweden by Julian's lawyers, and the courts, as I said, have slapped that prosecutor around. So what can happen now? A Swedish prosecutor goes to London. Ecuador has hailed this decision. Of course, will allow the questioners to go into the embassy. They will question Julian Assange, and what happens from that?
Well, there's different consequences that could happen. One is they could say that, as the first prosecutor said, that this case isn't strong enough to go forward with that case. That would be one. A second thing they could say is, well, maybe they could say, well, we think we're going to go forward anyway. But let's bring out one fact. Julian has now spent over 4 years in custody of some form. As you said, you opened 1,000 days in the embassy, almost 3 years. If he were sentenced, if he were convicted of these allegations, they were made into charges, and he's convicted, he would not do. He's done all the time he would have to do, and therefore he wouldn't do any time any longer. So the whole case is essentially a bogus way of keeping him in that embassy, and he has to be kept out of the United States and recognized asylum.